up, everybody? Welcome to Facts Not Included, the podcast. I'm your host, Peter Cabranes, and today, well, it's Friday, and that means it's Tangent Friday. I hope everybody is enjoying themselves, and then sit back and enjoy this episode as we go deep into some randomness. Well, being that, usually on Tangent Fridays we discuss some random story or random topic or whatever. We just converse, and it just leads us to something weird. I just felt like this episode would be something a little bit more concrete and something a little bit more on the nose. I don't know. Just felt like that would be the case today. But I want to talk a little bit about probably one of my favorite comedians of all time, Mr. George Carlin. Now, George Carlin, for those that don't know who he is, you would probably know him best from some of his HBO specials. He did about 14 of them, I think, throughout his career, probably more than anyone ever. He was in Jersey Girl, a Kevin Smith movie. Of course, I would mention that. He was also in Kevin Smith's Dogma. He was the priest in that movie, and he was also in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, and several other movies with Richard Pryor, if I'm not mistaken, at least two of them, if not one. But George Carlin's one of those great comedians. And the reason I want to talk about him is because I was at actually the Salvation Army not too long ago. First of all, where I live, there used to be one pretty near my house, and then it had to close because they're redoing like all this. They're redoing like this shopping center, and it's not opening for another year, and so they had to close all the stores that were there, and so the Salvation Army that was in that location is no longer there. So I had to drive a good, not too long, but a good like 20 minutes to go to the one that I'm also aware of somewhere else here on the island, and there's that disgusting. Listen, I'm not someone who usually shops there for clothes. I never shop there for clothes. It's not my thing. I don't knock people that go to thrift stores and buy clothing there. It's fine if you have to or if you want to. It's whatever. I don't care. But the thing is, for me, I don't think I will ever buy an article of clothing from a thrift store. It's just not my cup of tea. It's just, what gets me is that smell right when you walk in, especially into a Salvation Army. And I don't know if it's the clothing or if it's the furniture or if it's all of it mixed together. It just isn't the most. It's just not the most pleasant aroma for any human being to consume. And so it takes me a good 5 minutes, if not longer, to get accustomed to that smell when walking into one of these stores. And it's not something I'm really all too keen about. So actually, before I walk in, sometimes I'm just like, do I want to walk in? Is it necessary? I know I'm overreacting a bit, but it's just something that does bother me. I know there's not really anything they could do about it. But it's just not something that makes me all too happy about walking in. What does make me happy, what does make me happy about walking into a Salvation Army or any sort of thrift store would have to be the knowledge of books. The knowing that they have books, knowing that they have vinyls, knowing that they have old movies and some cool. I know my friends are going to laugh at this. Knowing that they have some cool retro or antique furniture is kind of fun to see. Being that I am an admirer of good furniture. I believe I have good taste, and if I like it, I want it. And so they have some cool stuff in some of these places. That being said, we were at the Salvation Army. She was looking for some sort of blouse or skirt or something. I can't remember. She couldn't find it. And so as you walk in, the clothing is right in the beginning. I don't know how most of the other ones are, but this one is a pretty interesting shaped building store. And so you walk in, the clothes are right there. As you go towards your left, there's more of this layout of, I guess you go silverware and flatware and all that stuff, utensils, mugs, glass and all that stuff, china and all that stuff. And so that section's over to your left. And then as you're going through there, as you keep walking past that, you'll start hitting the movies and the DVDs and all the vinyls and whatnot. And then as you get past that, you get all the furniture. Um, and so I walked in there not expecting to find anything cool, not expecting to find anything extraordinary in the vinyl bin. But, a lot of these Salvation Armies, they have shelves and shelves worth of vinyl records, and I go through it all. I always make sure I go through it all, just in case you never know. You might find a Michael Jackson, you might find a Beatles record, you might find some Rolling Stones or Bob Dylan or anything that's like, at least for me, somewhat valuable, or at least fascinating. And I also look for a lot of classical music. If you know me, you know that my collection of vinyl records, I think majority of them are of the classical genre. Anything from Bach, Beethoven, and all these extraordinary composers. That is part of my collection. I don't even care the name. I just this looks cool. This sounds cool. Oh, I've heard that song. I'll buy it. And then I'll also find like the rarities, like the cool, like Bee Gees. That if I once found a Bee Gees vinyl. Actually, funny story. I found the Bee Gees vinyl and a bunch of other vinyls in my hand at the same time. As I go to check out, I checked out. I got home, and the Bee Gees album is not in my possession. Apparently, I must have left it in the store. I never went back to get it. It wasn't that necessary for me to have, but I kind of like, I'm still kind of sad that I never got it. But anyway, so classical music is probably something that I have more of, more than any genre, I suppose, of vinyl. Actually, and also I have a lot of old Spanish music that I've inherited from a family friend. A lot of I have about 2 boxes worth of old Spanish music. That slow, romantic type of music from like Puerto Rico and Cuba and all that stuff. So I have an interesting collection. It's not a collection that most people would have, but it's an interesting collection. So when I go through these bins, I'm always making sure that I'm finding something that fits my taste or that would make me think a little bit outside the box and be like, oh, maybe I want to listen to this one day. I mean, when you come on, you're spending $1, $2 at most on these little records, so you're not spending a fortune on them. Sometimes I'll leave with 3 or 4 or 5 of them. And so I went through the bin here at this Salvation Army, and I was going through, and I wasn't really finding anything. I found some funny names, of course. What's that guy's name? Emberdick, Humpledink, or whatever his name is. I found his stuff, I found some other people that I've heard of, but I wasn't really interested in having their vinyls. And so I just kept going. I was like, I'm not going to find a comedy album. I'm not going to find any good, music album at all. I'm not going to find anything here. But I'll just keep going through it to keep myself amused and happy while she's looking for some clothes. And then she wound up joining me, and she actually went through some of the bins as well. And then we came across, I think it was me. Yeah, it was myself. I came across a George Carlin album, and I freaked out. I was so ecstatic. It was an amazing feeling because I don't own anything of his. Like, I've watched all of his specials on HBO, like when they were on demand. I'm not sure if they're on demand anymore, but when they were on demand on HBO or like on YouTube for free, you just watch them. Or yeah, like that. Actually, the only thing I do own one thing of his, and it's a book. It's 3 of his books in one. It's like this fat, thick book. It's huge. I have that, but nothing audio-wise, nothing visual do I own of George Carlin's. And so when I saw this, I was like, oh my God, this is a gold mine. And granted, it's only just like one record. And so I opened it to make sure that the vinyl worked. I wanted to see that there was no major scratches. I wanted to make sure that there was nothing on here. Excuse me, I keep having this weird like burp thing. I was drinking some seltzer. So I was making sure there was no scratches. I was making sure that it was working or that it would work when I played it on my record player. And so I was just examining it and all that. And I was like, and then I looked at myself. I was like, who cares? Just the fact that you own it would be cool. Like, hey guys, I own a George Carlin album. Really? Wow, let's listen to it. Well, we can't because it's broken. It's just that idea. And plus, I was only going to spend probably $1 at most on it. I think I'll end up spending $2 on it because they have their own prices here. And it's fine, whatever. $2 for this, and so it was George Carlin AM/FM, which is not everyone's favorite comedy album of his, but it is one of his more well-known ones. Probably the most well-known one of his is Class Clown, I believe it's called. And so that one's the one that Robin Williams talks about him like coming home early and just listening to it and just soaking in all that beautifulness that is George Carlin. But AM/FM is a solid solid album, and it has some really funny jokes in it. But it's the beginning of, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it's the beginning of George's, this awakening period for him. Because if anybody knows George Carlin, George was a very clean comedian early on in his career. I think his first 10 to 15 years, if I'm not mistaken, were very clean. He wore suits, he wore ties, he did the hippy dippy weatherman, he did all that wonderful clean comedy that still kind of works today, but it was very part of its time. It was very 50s. It was very 50s-esque type of comedy, very early 60s, where it was just these late night talk shows were just clean. You couldn't say a lot of things on American television back then. You can get away with a little bit more now on ABC or NBC and stuff like that. But it was I cannot find the word. It was the emergence of HBO later on. I think it was in the late 70s, early 80s, where HBO, mid to late 70s, I believe, when HBO came around, where Carlin found his footing. But in between that time of his early clean period till when he started getting on HBO. So George is known for these 7 words not to say on television, which he actually did say on TV. And so, George is one of those renegades. He was one of those rebels. He didn't care. And as he got older and older and older, he started to give less of a damn. He just didn't care about who was listening. And that's what makes him so fascinating, especially because as he started getting older, we started, and we're, especially where we're at now in this political and world climate, where you have to be really careful of what you say. And I understand that. And I'm one of those people that tell people, hey, think about what you're saying to someone else. And I get that. But George wasn't one of those people. George was just like, I don't give a shit. I'm going to say what I want, when I want, and how I want. And he really, really did not give a damn. But he was so smart about it too, because he wasn't just someone going on a mic just like I am, just opening their mouth and letting whatever comes out. George wrote everything down. If you know anything about him and you looked into his history or read any of his books, George wrote all of his stuff down. And some of those jokes that are in his books made it to the screen, but he tweaked them. He tweaked them for an audience that would understand them visually. He did not just do jokes, because when you read a joke, it's a little bit different than when you hear a joke. That sounds weird, but it's true. And delivery is very important. And so George would deliver a joke that he probably had in one of his books. He would deliver it a different way, and it would land a different way. And sometimes 10 times better than what was on the page, and sometimes maybe the one that was on the page was a little bit better. But George was one of these radical people, and he fascinates me every single day. I got interested in George Carlin back in, I think I was 10. I think I was 10 when I found out about George Carlin. I most certainly was way too young. to find out about him. I found out about him because growing up, like before I was 10, like way before I was 10, we didn't really have cable. Like we had cable, and then I think, okay, I'm not sure actually how it was in my house. I think they had cable before I was born. Then they got rid of it at some point, and then they got it back when I was probably about 6 or 7, and then we've had it since. But there was like a small period where we didn't really have cable. We had that. It's, again, for those listening, you might not understand, but there was a time, especially I think here in New York, if not the whole country, I'm not sure. But there was a time where you could watch TV. You can get a lot of channels for free by just having this like box, or just I'm sure it was highly illegal if I'm not mistaken. But you get like a ton of channels for free. You paid someone to like hotwire this box or whatever. I'm not sure. I think we had that. I don't know. Can't hold me to it. I have no idea. I was too young. But then at some point, I always hit the mic, damn it. At some point, we got actual cable. And so when you get actual cable, they give you like first 3 months or something of HBO for free, and Showtime and Cinemax and all that sexy fun stuff. And so this is where I found out a lot about certain adult themes that I maybe shouldn't have been getting into at that age. Well. And so when I was about 10, 11, 12, and even, but there was a small period. I want to say about from 10 to maybe about 16 or 15. The internet for me was a very important thing. And I didn't use the internet really for anything else other than like maybe play some stupid games online that would probably give me a virus. But for some weird reason, comedy's always been an extremely important tool for me. And I've always been told I could be a comedian. I've always been told that I could, garner an audience in that regard. So I've always wanted to learn more about that realm of life. So I was always looking up comedy videos on like YouTube, or YouTube wasn't around in 2005. So I would look up like, I think it was like LimeWire or whatever. I would just find things on the internet. And so, and there was, sites that had videos and stuff. And so I would look up all these people. And then when YouTube came around, people were just throwing things. Excuse me, I keep burping. They kept throwing things on YouTube and just throwing things there about comedy specials and shows that I never even heard of, and people I was just finding out about, and it just blew my mind. So it was about, I want to say, because George passed away in 2008, so it definitely was 2005. He did a special in 2005. I want to find out the name, so give me 1 second. George Carlin, 2000. Okay, here we go. It's called "Life Is Worth Losing," and I think it was shot here in New York. Life is Worth Losing. The backdrop was kind of like this weird. It was like a cityscape type of thing. But there was also like a cemetery there. It looked really interesting. And this is where I found out about George. And he opens the show with probably the most fascinating opening I've ever heard. And I think it's let me see if I can find it. Sorry, my phone's going off. I'm a modern man, a man for the millennium, digital and smoke-free, a diversified, multicultural, postmodern deconstruction that is anatomically and ecologically incorrect. I've been uplinked and downloaded. I've been inputted and outsourced. I know the upside of downsizing. I know the downside of upgrading. I'm a high-tech lowlife. And then it goes on and on and on, right? That is just... But the way he delivers it, because the way I just did it was just like boring and who cares. But the way he delivers it just blows your mind. It's just fascinating from him. He was an incredible individual, and he just knew how to use language. And he always spoke about that in all his specials. He knew how to use language to his benefit. He was a salesman in a sense, and he always talked about salesmen and being like, really undermining people and being assholes and all that stuff. But he in himself, in his own way, he was a salesman, and he was really good at it. To be honest, he was amazing at it. So I found out about George in 2005. I was about 10 years old. Yeah, I was 10 years old. I found out about him in 2005, if not 2006. Let's say I was 11. I was on HBO's thing, and I saw that there was a special on. So if it was 2005, the special had just come out, and if it was in 2006, then the special was just about a year old. So I watched it, and I knew I shouldn't have been watching it. So I think I had my door closed, and I was just hiding, not hiding, but I just had my door closed, or I just tilted the TV a certain way so that no one knew that I was listening or watching, because I just knew while watching this that this may not be the best thing an 11-year-old or 10-year-old should be listening to or watching. So I told myself, yeah, you should probably keep the door a certain way. But so I listened to it, I watched it, and I was like, I need to know more about this man. So I told all my friends in school about this gentleman, and I told a couple of good friends of mine, and they were like, yeah, I heard about him. I heard he's crazy, blah, 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 blah. And so then I watched his other stuff, and I found out so much about him. And I'm one of these people that if I find someone or find out about something or someone, like there's a YouTuber I watch. You guys may have heard of stuff. And you can say what you want about him. I don't agree with him on everything, but he's like this automotive guy. His name is Scotty Kilmer. You guys probably have seen his stuff. He's an older gentleman. He's been doing YouTube since I think the inception of YouTube. He used to work for CBS, so he knows how to edit and stuff. And so whether you agree with him or not, his videos are entertaining. And so like I watched one, and then I watched two. I think I've watched like 60 of his videos by now. It's kind of sickening. It's kind of unhealthy, but hey, that's how I am. So that's how I was with George. I found out about him, and I wanted to know everything about him. And so I did that. I watched videos and interviews he did, and I told myself, wait, I know this guy. I've seen him, and I didn't know from where, and then I found out it was from Dogma. I already had seen Dogma at such an early age. I was probably about 6 when I saw Dogma for the first time. And so I found out everything I needed to know about George so early on. And so that also sparked I think George might have been the spark for the comedy thing. I don't know. I don't know if, I mean, I don't think it was, because it most certainly wasn't my spark. But, because I was actually always watching comedy related movies or TV shows before that. But I think a stand-up thing, like the idea of stand-up being an art form, probably started with George. I don't know, but I would have to say that. And so then I knew about Robin Williams, but I didn't know Robin was a stand-up, So that's the weird thing I started finding out about all these comedians. Like, I knew about Eddie Murphy, but I didn't know Eddie Murphy was a stand-up. I knew about Richard Pryor, but I didn't know Richard Pryor was a stand-up. And so I got into this full-fledged, like, stand-up routine, stand-up, like, I don't even know how to call it. Just this love of stand-up comedy. And I just started watching everyone's stand-up, Steve Martin's stuff, just freaking classic comedy from like I was going to say the 50s, but I haven't really watched anything from the 50s, really, other than George Carlin stuff. But, like, started watching comedy specials from the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, 90s, and then even the 2000s. Like, I was always on Comedy Central just watching, like, I know, this guy is ridiculous. But I was always watching, like, Carlos Mencia and, just dumb stuff. And so George, I think, has a lot to do with that. My awareness of stand-up comedy comes a lot from George. And George, to me, is that there's only a few people that are at the high mark of comedy for me. And I'm not going to name them all, but there are 3 for me that are at that Mount Rushmore. And they would have to be Richard Pryor. No holds barred there with that. Like, first of all, he was no holds barred. But, like, no question about it, Richard Pryor is at the top. Well, not at the top, but he's up there. Richard Pryor, George Carlin, Don Rickles, and Robin Williams, for me, are like, you cannot touch these guys. You cannot. Bill Cosby was up there. Bill was up there. And I think he still is. Like, I mean, listen, I don't want to get into that because that stuff is disgusting and sickening. But his comedy itself, maybe stands the test of time. I don't know. Doesn't look like it will, and that's fine by me. I don't care. But what he did give us on stage, though, was some fascinating, funny stuff. And he was always a clean comedian, which is kind of weird knowing that he was doing this sick and disgusting stuff behind closed doors. But George, Richard, Don, and Robin Williams are up there for me. You cannot touch I mean, now if something comes out about these guys, and hey, that's a little different. But the comedy itself, these gentlemen are up there in comedy. Joan Rivers, if you want to talk about, if you want to add a female up there, she deserves a fucking spot up there, man. She was hysterical because if anybody knows her time as the Tonight Show host or any of her times on the Tonight Show, she definitely deserves a spot up there. I don't know really any other female comedians that really deserve a spot. I don't know really any male comedians that deserve that spot either. So let's keep it at that. But yeah, I mean those 4 or 5 are truly like those. You cannot touch them. They are untouchable in regards to the comedy that they brought because they all changed the game. That was the thing. They all changed the game. Robin even said it himself like years ago. Robin was like, people were doing this type of comedy and I wanted to do this style. And so that's what he did. He changed the game a little bit. And some people started doing that type of comedy, you know? And so George Carlin, of course, changed the game. The 7 words you can't say on TV, and his style of just not giving a crap and just letting the audience. The thing about George, and I'm going to keep saying this, the thing about George was that he just loved language. And he just loved to manipulate it in a way that made you go, oh, I'm being duped. You know, one of my favorite George Carlin bits is the airport stuff, where he talks about the airport. I mean, granted, this is all pre 9/11, but all that airport terminology, it's kind of like, you know, there's some misnomers in there. There's some redundancy. And so George likes to play on that stuff. And he just loved language. And then the thing I also love about George is the fact that he was an atheist and the fact that he was just like, another one of my favorite routines was his whole thing about he prays to the sun. He worships the sun. Sorry, he worships the sun, but he prays to Joe Pesci. And I mean, granted, it's all BS. He wasn't doing probably any of that, but it's just so funny, you know. It was just so funny. And then as George got older, I guess some people would think he got meaner and whatever, but it was just, yeah, he kind of became a grumpy old man where he was just like, I don't give a shit about any of this stuff. But George was a fascinating man. He was a fascinating individual, and I could talk about him for hours and days and days and days. But I just felt like letting you guys know about the amazing George Carlin. Just, I don't know, for as long as or as little as could talk about him. He's given so much to the world of comedy, and we miss him every day, man, because he died young, man. He was only 71. Now, for some people, that's like, damn, that's old. But 71 in 2008, come on, you could have made it a little bit longer, George. But man, what an amazing man, what an amazing individual. And what's cool about him too is that unless something comes out, but no stink about him, man. He was as true as he could be. What you saw on stage was a little bit, wasn't what you got off stage. Because what it seemed like George was off stage. George was an intellectual. George came off as a little goofy sometimes on stage, a little bit too goofy. But he was an intellectual, man. And off stage, if you catch an interview with him, he's always 5 steps ahead of the interviewer. And he's always like, what stupid shit are you going to say, Mr. Interviewer? It's the kind of mentality he had. George knew what was coming. George was smarter than everyone he probably ever met. And that's what makes him so fascinating to me. Man, I miss him, man. He really made an imprint on me. I think I shaped my life about, in regards to what he brought us. I shaped a lot. And again, going back to the people that influenced me and molded me, I mean, him, Michael Jackson, Robin Williams, people like that really made me understand what it was like to live a certain way, and to see life differently than other people. And yeah, Kevin Smith, he's gonna be missed, man. I mean, George. It's been what? It's been 10 years since he passed, and it's crazy, you know. It's kind of sad. But I think he passed away in in June. Yeah, June 22nd, 2008. So just a few days ago was his anniversary, 10-year anniversary death. Yeah. Well, so sad. Well, thanks guys for listening to this episode. I do appreciate the time you took to listen to this little randomness that I just went into about George. But that's the point of these Fridays. Tangent Fridays is all about the randomness and the fun that we do have here at Facts Not Included. Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. And remember, if you found us on any of the platforms that we are on, just let all your friends know that we are there and that we will continue to be there forever and ever. No. Well, just also make sure you are sharing and talking about us on Facebook and Twitter and wherever else that you guys talk about things on the internet. Thank you guys so much. I'll see you later.